Good evening there. Good evening, everyone. Hello, Facebook and YouTube viewers, and welcome to After Sessions. This is the 13th of July, 2020. Monday at 8 p.m. Irish time. This is our casual questions and answers time about content that's shared during our Sunday sessions. Thank you for joining me. I'm, as you can see in the bottom, I'm John Wilmot, the Woodland Bard, and this is an After Sessions questions and answers. So please comment abundantly throughout this session, and also while watching this later as when it's in the archive form. You can ask me questions on tree lore and Ogham, water lore, Sheet and Fae, and the bardic lore and poetry, and especially about creating and using your own shared tree garden sanctuary or your labyrinth. There's our Dancing Lady Labyrinth. So it's lovely that you found your way here. I see there's a couple of you here. And I got some comments. Excuse me already. So please leave the comments. Tell me, for one, are you actually hearing me and seeing me okay? Tell me where you're from and let me know that you're about. That would be great. Thanks very much. Now, for the first question I've got coming up, I'm taking questions really from yesterday's session, it seems. And there was one that came happening yesterday. It was a session on dragons, serpents, and snakes. And of course, there is a snake in the Adam and Eve story. The fall of man story is kind of the one that's teaching us all kinds of things around the good and evil. And they are from Drumcliff, the fall of man story. But the one thing I find about this, it tends to be the way that most people hear it is it sort of creates divisions, and that's very topical at the moment, is the way we don't want stories to create divisions. There's enough divisions, I think, where we're in a situation that, yeah, I'm on the good guys and those are the bad guys. We're all on this earth together. It's a closed circuit, so let's work around that. And the other thing about the teaching of, I think, of that fall of man, the Adam and Eve, I find it stirs a lot of demoralizing emotions, a bit like shame and guilt. And when we're under shame and guilt, what we're taught or encouraged to do is live a life of penance. And if we live a glorious life of penance, then we're promised that wonderful life, afterlife of heaven. There you go. You get the harp when you're in heaven. Or if you're on the wrong side, as they say, you get your penance in hell later. So please, that's my comment and feeling, brief comment and feelings about that. So please share your comments and feelings and your questions about that story that you perhaps have heard of Adam and Eve and that tempting serpent that had an apple. So they say, I'm going to talk a little bit about that a bit shortly. But tell me, is that a story that caused you to cause segregation of the good and bad, heaven and earth? Has that divided you and divided people around you, just that thought? Has that taught you to actually be judge and jury of other people? Now, there's another side that's been thought of this, and I brought this up yesterday, if I can get a wee picture on that. And that was the idea of the ancient story. And this is one that I've heard from storytellers in different situations. The idea of Eve actually not being a human, but a goddess and consort. And I've heard storytellers tell of the Garden of Eden story where it didn't feature a mortal woman or a snake seducer. And through their stories, the woman Eve was not mortal, but was an immortal mother creator goddess. And her consort was a serpent who kind of was a serpent that was a cycle or a spiral of fertile life. So the serpent and the snake was not an evil creature to shame us, but as you see, as a symbolic source of wholeness. Now, in the 17th century, along came the Renaissance painters and sculptors, and they introduced apples into the Adam and Eve story. And this was, I believe, a crossover inspiration with the projected apples, well, the protected apples that were on the tree of life in Hesperides, is in Greek mythology. And that story, if you look into it, is filled with nymphs and sprites and a sort of fairy folk, she folk, that were within the trees, and the water, very much in the Greek mythology, the Greek folklore there. And I think it's absolutely remarkable how the fae and the she folklore, it intertwines with the serpent folklore that I covered in Sunday session last night. So please, again, post your comments, your opinions, feelings, and questions about this variation of the creation story. Do you believe in Adam and Eve as the first two human beings, or do you believe in Eve being symbolic of a goddess with a male serpent consort? I'd like to hear what you have to say on that. And what do you actually feel about Eden? Eden, the Garden of Eden. How about that being a symbol of a garden sanctuary? Because I'm always talking about garden sanctuaries. This is the whole root of all these Sunday sessions and what we do here at Carracroy. So think of that, the Garden of Eden being a symbol of a garden sanctuary where we start from, rather than be a place that we're banished from. And then when we're banished, we're urged to join a church, and which is, as we know, humans build the church. It's a human constructed building. And then within that building, we're told that the beautiful Eden was the source of our temptation and human downfall. Could you imagine your tree sanctuary or garden sanctuary, the temptations that may pour upon you with your wild imagination, the fairies dancing around maybe, or the she, or these invisible friends appearing? Do you think those temptations are our human downfall? And also in your comments, when you comment away, please comment about the relationship between church and community, because there's one thing no denying. It sounds like I'm putting the church down, the human-built church. But the one thing that the built churches, the human-built churches do notice, they do inspire community connection. We're not exactly, in most cases, we're not going to have the whole village around to our garden sanctuary. That's for us. Is that something you agree with? Again, something for the comments. So comment about the human division. That's taught to us, the good and the sin, the heaven and the hell. And is there any chat going on at the moment? I wonder, please tell me if you're hearing me. I'm loud and clear here. If you're watching this later, please comment and I'll come back to you on this as well. So, where am I? Let's go to another question here. Moving on to, this is one that was Donna Johnston was mentioning yesterday. She's very curious because I was talking about the skull and crossbones as part of a story. So I think I'll go over this, thinking about the skull and crossbones. You'd think, what has that got to do with Sunday sessions? Anyway, something that I'm incredibly fascinated about. Let's get to our things here. It's about the folklore and the traditions about the little known Draken and Groiner. It's a battle story, and it seems to be the root of quite a few things. Draken, it seems, is related to a word that's bounced around. I'm not sure where it came from. Draken. And Draken, it tends to mean scaly. There we have a bit of a scaly reptile there to give you a sense of Draken. You're in the realm of Draken there, meaning scaly. And Groiner, on the other hand, she tends to have names related to the ripening of cereals. I didn't pick up any pictures on that in the summer. And Draken as well tends to be symbolic of the sea and water, and there's an artist's impression of Draken. Draken's a Fomorian of the sea people, the men that were out at sea. They would come ashore and they would find pretty Tuatha women like Grania, there's an artist, and try to lure them with the gold rings, and they would mate with them. And if the women had daughters, the daughters would stay with them for the harvest and look after the land. But the lads, well, they when they were teens, they would be taken away to sea to be with the men sea people. That's the way the story, the folklore story goes. Excuse me for that. But Gronia, symbolic of the land and the harvest. But at that time, she had lost a mate at the time of the story, and she wasn't going to be seduced by Fomorian coming ashore with these bright gold rings. And so she got into a battle. She wasn't going to go for this. And of course, being Ireland, a 3-day battle. And at the end of the 3 days, and I haven't got any pictures of this, fortunately, I suppose, that she cut off Draken's head and his arms. And she buried his head and then had the 2 arms like that, crossed it over, and so that his spirit from his head wouldn't surface again and terrorize the other Tuatha women or any other folk. He was sealed in to the underworld for good. So we have, there's a few transitions from this root story, this Gronia and Draken battle. As I talked, the Gronia's method of burying Draken. And this, sadly, I couldn't find a picture, but this seemed to have inspired probably the earliest of the Ulster flag, which was actually a skull, and there were crossbones, but the skull became a hand, is the oldest one. So, and then it became the Patrick's cross, didn't it? But the origin had a skull. I used to see pictures, and I've got one somewhere, but I couldn't find it. And then later in the story, it's the Knights Templar, when they were escaping from France and finding other homes. A lot of them went, the Stuarts had welcomed them up into Scotland, the Mull of Kintyre that way, and they also welcomed into Fermanagh. And the seafaring Knights Templar, they actually had a seafaring flag in relation to this. And it's sort of a kind of a save our souls, protect us, because it is sort of dragon related, dragon, the way the story had turned, and with the skull that had been put underground and the cross over it. So protect from spirits, from sea serpents coming out, that type of thing. And I did actually find, this is the remnants of their Jolly Rouge flag. And I bet that already reminds you of something, because the Royal Navy actually adapted that and to be their Save Our Souls flag for sea missions. And it was, when they were on a mercy mission, it was like pre-lifeboats, when they were off to save, perhaps they got word somehow of a boat in difficulty, how they did, because obviously they didn't have satellite communications. But here are some British soldiers with an old Save Our Souls flag. So there we have it, and they adopted that. But of course, as they were out at sea, then they were terrorized by pirates who believed that when they'd rescue ships, they would actually have bounties on board. And so, of course, they started fooling them by putting the same flag up. But then Errol Flynn and Hollywood, they got really into the pirate flag, and this is the sort of thing you're probably much more familiar with. So the Hollywood charged Jolly Roger, transformed out of the Jolly Rouge. And some of the transitions from the tradition of Draken and Gronia. And another one is the Archaea, is the transitions from Gronia actually becoming the patriarchal George. And with the George stories, I'll come on to the George stories here. He was initially rescuing abused women. I suppose he thought the Fomorians were still around or something like that. But abused women that, not from the Fomorian dragon at this time, but by dragons themselves. And I showed this yesterday. There he is. He's rescuing what looks like a very abused woman on the left. He's got the dragon there. And so those stories started moving around. But unfortunately, with those George stories, they started moving into not rescuing the women, but trying to grab the gold rings or even the gold treasure that the dragon was protecting. And oh, feck any woman that he's doing. So there he is. Poor George is trying to get the dragon's treasure, but he doesn't realize how heated the dragon could be. So I think George is in a bit of trouble there. Another transition that's fascinating, I find. I don't know if you've thought about that idea that the Fomorians came ashore and mated with the Tuatha women, that if they had boys, the boys would be taken away, but the young girls would be stayed. Does that remind you of the stolen child folklore, the fairy folklore? I think it does. In the days where people used to dress their sons up in girls' clothing, so that if the fae and the fairies came along, they would think they were all daughters and they wouldn't take any away. There's a lot of similarities I find with these dragon serpenty stories with the she and the fae, very similar. I think there's quite an overlap between the serpent she and fairy stories, but all of them very symbolic of life in the underworld, especially the underworld of water. And that water, it surfaces, there it goes towards the light, where the life then competes on earth under the sun, and everything for the harvest is competing for that sunlight. So please, again, do venture into making comments of your feelings of those transitions from Groinian dragon, your idea and interpretations of the dragon and serpent and the dragon and George stories. Put your comments there. I hope please tell me if you're actually getting this. I'm surprised there isn't any comments yet, and I'm just hoping this is broadcasting okay. We did have a little bit of problem yesterday. So maybe it's just a quiet night and you'll be commenting later. Now, before the last question, may I ask you to be able to ask questions for these after sessions from next Monday and all the ones after? You can either ask to join me live here through live shared screen video, or message me to join me next Monday or any other Monday. Or what you can do is send me a pre-recorded video with your questions and ideas. You can be up to 5 minutes long, or you can join me by posting text and with your comments from Facebook or YouTube as I'm live, and or you can comment as you're watching these archives later. So do throw those questions in. And I must admit, I'm very surprised I'm not getting the questions yet. Usually this is popular, and I was doing this yesterday, Sunday sessions, the first time around. I was chatting away, and I was looking at the number of people that were there watching and commenting, and there was nobody. And on Sunday sessions, it's usually quite busy. And then I found at the end of the session that I'd had the microphone cut off. So I hope this doesn't happen this time. I'll have to do the whole thing again next Monday if that's the case. But I hope you can pick this up. Now, I've got one more question that I'm picking up. This is from me. This is my question. And it's based on something from yesterday. What about the nodes, the dragon paths in astrology charts? Well, here at Karakori, visitors and now through online stream, I focus on the essential need for personal sanctuary. And this is the answer for one of the, let's bring these nodes up again. They have the head of the dragon, the north node, and the tail of the dragon, being the south node. Now, this is taking symbols that are on the astrology chart. Now, one of the interpretations of the south node to me is a description on the birth chart of our place of sanctuary. Now, some people may describe this as a womb place. Others will speak of the south node as being our home space. And our home space or sanctuary, whatever it is, I imagine that and symbolize that as the place where we can curl up. And where we curl up, we contemplate. It's a sort of short hibernation. And then from that, we unravel and we feel fresh and reborn. So I feel in folklore, the South Node is where we are all umbilically connected to that great mother womb. And some may say that it's that point where we're actually tapped right into our consciousness. And then we have that North Node there, the one that's sticking up that looks like a hair wig. And that being our dragon's head. And maybe we have multiple heads, like the Naga serpent there. So each head, yeah, it looks quite vicious, doesn't it? But each head being our destiny choices. And each head is us taking a chance. And in between each node, that's north and south node, there we have between the node is the story. Let's put this one up. It's the story of our life. And in between each node, the north and south, it's the story that our life creates. Our legacy may be karma out or karma in. But here at Karakroy, I think we're all about coaching our recognition of how essential sanctuary is to us. And for this to actually be outside rather than inside, where possible, make yourself a tree labyrinth, make yourself a tree sanctuary, or a lovely little garden sanctuary, even a rock garden sanctuary. And here, it's a sanctuary where you can actually weave in, because we got the tree labyrinth. It's about your destiny. I've got this here. And it's about, I didn't bring up the labyrinth pictures. Oh dear, never mind. I was going to show that bit of labyrinth. But we have the tree labyrinth here, and I think some of you are familiar with it, where you can actually walk in towards the center. And it's like two serpents breaking open the chakra when you weave out. You weave in to curl up and contemplate. And then with the labyrinth from the center, you unravel like two serpents breaking out and open your chakras. And that serves your awakening. And by doing so, you got a clear vision of where you are within the labyrinth, where you are now, where you are within your story. So here we have the place of nodes, the north and the south. And I feel that's a kind of route map in our astrology chart. It inspires our story, it inspires our living dragon path. And I think it's the most powerful thing on the birth chart to actually divinate upon. And when you're going through a labyrinth into the sanctuary, the center sanctuary of your garden, that's very much a place to divinate on. And I think it's more powerful and more important and more useful to us than the sun, moon, and especially something like Pluto in our birth chart. So I'm going to check again to see if anybody's there. It is awfully quiet. I've never had it as quiet as this. Are you all out pubbing? Something like that. I don't know. Anyway, it seems unusual. I would be glad to check this at the end to make sure you're all lively. So those are the questions I featured in this session. I'll go through the various banners here. You can, for the people on Facebook, you can join the Karakroy sessions with the Facebook group. If you're on YouTube, the Karakroy channel on YouTube. And this is all sponsored by yourselves. That's karakroycottage.com. That's our website. But in order to fund these sessions and the Labyrinth Gardens, there's the tip jar address. I appreciate it. Trying to raise about another 800 euros to cover expenses at the moment. So flash that again. Yep. There we go. So thank you very much for your support. I'd like to go back. What's coming up in the Sunday sessions? We have next Sunday, we have the Ballymote Bard story. And that's going to be interesting. That's taken from the book of Ballymote. And I'm going to actually go to traditions and folklore that led up to the creation of this scribing. And then I'm going to say a bit about what happened after that book, the book of Ballymote, in late medieval times, how it was published. And then we're on the 26th of July, we have the Garland Sunday, the lovely lady with the garland. It's not going to happen in Caish or in various places. I don't think people are going to be climbing Croagh Patrick. So I'm going to be talking about some of the traditions. Why do the Garland Sunday here have a baby show and a dog show? I'm going to go into his interesting origins, why that is so, and they're lovely stories. So I think that's it. I'm going to check to see. Oh, I see he's gone up to the door. I'm going to check just to see if there's any action. Please put a comment just to say you're here, because, as I say, this is quiet. And I hope nothing's wrong and that you'll say something later. People are coming and going, I see, which is, does that mean you're not getting sound? It's a pity. Anyway, that's the way it goes sometimes. So thank you for those of you who have been watching and listening to this after sessions. Please keep asking the questions and comments here. And if you are watching this as an archive after live, just keep comments going. So I'm going to end here. Enjoy a safe week full of wonder, inspiration, and celebration. And do use an outdoor sanctuary, your own, when you need it. So until next Sunday, all the questions and answers on Monday. Play well, relax, and it's bye from me.